Remember 2022? Today, I know so many qualified people who are struggling to find good roles, even down-leveled. But then, I contacted hundreds of people for over a dozen open roles. I managed to recruit 2. Today, we're going to talk about doing more with fewer people than we planned. Redfin makes our money buying and selling homes. We pay our engineers by the sweat of an agent's brow. The sudden transition from historically low interest rates to the highest rates in a generation created a lock-in effect, causing home transactions to reach their lowest levels since the 90s. And we know what comes with lower revenue: layoffs. My team today is roughly a third of the people initially allocated. We started with a single, heroic technical program manager, Libby Hodson, who'd established real processes for incident and operations review. I joined in September of 21. I'm Arthur Patterson, and I joined Redfin to build an SRE program. You may be wondering what that means. So was I. So I did what you're supposed to do in the first 90 days. I offered opinions without context. No, I listened. I talked to about 10% of engineering about their hopes and dreams, from junior engineers to directors. And critically, I'd first joined a scrappy startup called Redfin in pre-housing crisis 2007, but had left for larger pastures in 2011. Redfin grew significantly in 10 years, but it still held the same core values, and understanding the culture is at least half the battle. Speaking of culture, 2 things you should know. Our mascot is a rabbit squirrel, and we don't use slides much, so I'm sorry if they look like my 4-year-old made them. He helped. Historically, Redfin mostly had a monolith run by an on-call ops team. Most engineers spent their time building features. When things broke in the middle of the night, if one of our superheroes couldn't figure it out, maybe they'd try and call someone who worked in that area, and maybe they'd be reachable, but it wasn't scaling. Less about on-call than teams in a single release pipeline. Also, we were vertically scaling our primary database with the largest server money could buy. Starting around 2020, we began turning feature teams into service teams, asking them to split out of the monolith using a standardized framework. You may find me using feature and service interchangeably. Many of our programs were designed to support this transition. Sorry. So then we started facing the question, how do we run these? Surprisingly, people overwhelmingly wanted to learn how to be service owners, even with more operational responsibility, including moderate on-call. Only 3 thought SRE should carry their pager. That was a relief. SRE would be an enablement organization, owning programs and standards for production operations and incident response. We'd engage directly with teams having the hardest times, designing and helping build a better way. We'd establish common operational standards so adjacent teams could share on-call once they were ready. Each would contribute 1 or 2 engineers to a pod, plus an SRE member as a norm setter. And central to the success of this idea was having standards to prevent noisy neighbors from participating. Our partner teams would be responsible for frameworks: compute, database, middleware, release, testing. We'd work with those teams to solve any common operational issues we saw. Our observability team would become part of SRE. They ran our self-hosted logs and metric stacks, administered some shall-remain-unnamed third-party tools, built a homegrown SLO dashboard, and made sure Redfin got the most value from all of these, which was hard given they spent half their time keeping things from falling over. Also, I only ever managed to hire 6 of those people. Of course, Redfin hadn't been completely ignoring reliability or operations. Libby had established an instant review process with a Slack bot for timely shepherding. That's still used today. Based on this, she presented a monthly review to directors and above, covering incidents, what we learned from them, any missed Tier 1 SLOs, and stats around our daily Monolith release. And this meeting was a drag. Reading slides, questioning if the data is accurate, and if so, just confirming the teams followed up on their problems. Rarely were we discussing themes or strategy, but it wasn't the attendees' fault. The data was kind of arbitrary and frequently broken, when we could even cross-correlate it across sources. Now, Redfin had a concept of service tiers, but no definition other than higher tier features are more important than lower tier features. The guidance for SLOs was you should hit your objectives, not what they should be set to. And no one trusted the numbers anyways, as our statsd server would load shed when it wasn't falling over. It would help if we could measure what we were trying to improve. So we started there. Half our software is for our internal employees. So we defined during Windows during which we even cared about operations. 7 a.m. to Eastern to 7 p.m. Hawaiian for our field organization, and 9 to 5 Pacific for our West Coast-centric engineering team. Measuring the real impact of incidents in our environment isn't easy. Our conversion funnel is long, and a lot of it happens offline. Something breaks, people just come back later. Internally, people shift to other work. It masks the disruption. We set SLO targets by tier based on what we could track: sessions, productivity by role, revenue, where it made sense. But the numbers don't always tell the whole story, so we added qualitative questions to help teams think critically about their impact. If your feature is broken for a day, would it show up on earnings? Could a clever analyst notice? Or is the effect smaller than that, but still real? We had standards. Now we needed to help teams measure against them. We asked them to identify their user journeys and assign each a tier. To help teams learn from each other, we ran SLO workshops with groups of teams. Each brought someone who could act as the voice of the user, someone who understood the architecture, and someone who knew the business value. We built a worksheet to walk teams through their SLO definitions. First, we asked them to explain, like they're talking to a non-technical friend, what's your feature, who uses it, why. Then they define how to measure if it's working as their users expect, and what reliability is achievable with less than a week's investment. That was often very different than what the guidance said it should be set to. And we wanted to make teams comfortable with having their only pageable alerts be SLO violations, and stated 4 goals that we thought would help get them there. Are you confident your SLOs will be violated if your users are experiencing degraded service? When they are violated, do you treat that as an alert that requires urgent response? Do you feel confident that you can update your SLOs as the scope of your feature changes? And most importantly, is this useful to you, or does it just feel like we're making you do it? We just finished setting up our first pod of teams with the standards for shared on-call when our own forces were reduced. In the first round, many teams shrank, some products eliminated, but we'd only lost open headcount, not people. Now, no team had spare capacity to change how they worked, and we lost momentum on rolling out more formal on-call. Reducing alerting noise was still the biggest opportunity for reliability improvements, but we were challenged to build a self-service workshop instead of working team by team. Teams experiencing the most pain should be the most self-motivated. That pain was primarily alert fatigue, alerts misaligned with user problems, and learned helplessness. The workshop is technically self-service, but the cultural education is much more effective when we take an hour to walk teams through the examples, explaining some of the nuance that they may otherwise miss, directly relate the examples to their lived experience, and most importantly, tell us using our mouth words that sleep reliability is just as important as service reliability. More important than defining how each priority should be used, we set guidance for the frequency based on the human cost. If you're paged more than once a week, you're probably working after hours. More than 10 tickets a week means you're just in triage mode. Anything not requiring action shouldn't ping you. As preparation, we asked teams to group their recent alerts for analysis. We present scenarios from the CEO can't access Redfin through different burn rates to set the context of what's worth waking up for. To eliminate alert noise, we particularly focus on identifying the time scale on which action needs to be taken and whether there's a higher signal indicator of a problem. And it works. We reduced our pageable alert volume by 75% in a year by helping our teams with the biggest burdens. With reliable data and potential focus areas, it was time to tackle operational health reporting. Not just SLOs and alert volumes, but how to handle broader issues, including engineers' lived experience. We took the existing tactical service health review and pushed it down a layer. Instead of the CTO asking directors how their teams followed up on problems, directors were just given a script to ask their leads directly. So that teams always had the right answer, they started meeting regularly to review their metrics and operations. We changed the meeting with directors and above to be a review of operational trends and exceptions, or wrote, what reliability themes are we seeing? What should we do about them? We created buckets of questions, each of which synthesized data to the next layer of the funnel. Each director selected an operational champion to synthesize teams' input data for review and output their synthesis for rote. They're also the point of contact when teams have questions about their own reviews. Libby and I do the quarterly data analysis and presentation for Directors Up. We analyze things like which teams have the highest alert load. Did any team struggle to maintain their SLOs multiple quarters in a row? And what themes come up in weekly reviews across orgs? Discussion themes have included, do engineers do enough research before asking another team for help? And would more testing lead to fewer incidents? We kept hearing how teams didn't feel like they had enough time for product work because of required maintenance. We define the cost of keeping the lights on, or KTLO, to be anything required to keep the business functioning at parity, anything from incidents to unexpected mid-quarter feature changes because the industry is moving so fast. Upon inspection, the cause was obvious. Engineering had shrank by 1/3 in the last year, so fixed costs go up by 50%. Spirited discussions around how other companies spend their time led to an aspirational declaration by Fiat. Engineers should spend 70% of their time on product work, 20% on required maintenance, and 10% making themselves more efficient. Now, all we had were anecdotes. We needed to figure out how to measure where we were spending our time. We interviewed teams, asking how they spend their time and what do they consider required maintenance. After building a taxonomy, we asked our interviewed teams to use it and got numbers which they felt matched their lived experience. So we rolled it out for all teams. We pre-categorized every item teams spent time on with every flavor of time unit to eliminate the mental tax of how to capture even the smallest items. Now, it was expensive for every team to itemize a baseline, over 1/10 of one engineer's annual capacity when you added up all the teams. That detailed state capture allows us to only talk about the diffs going forward, so quarterly snapshots are much cheaper, and we only report on the top-level buckets within KTLO product and foundational work. We've looked into automation to make it cheaper still, but capturing the same fidelity would require uniform adoption or strict program management. To capture the qualitatives, we asked teams which items feel the most expensive regardless of how much time you actually spend on them, and the realized impact of attempts to improve. Because measuring is just the first step, we wrote 17 action items teams could take to drive down their KTLO. The first, sunshine's the best disinfectant. Just by measuring your time spent, you'll start thinking about how to reduce it because you're consciously aware of it. And we decided to report on three things: teams with significant changes and why, how each bucket of KTLO is trending over time, and trends of time spent by org. We are careful to never compare teams. Even with detailed instructions, interpretations are going to vary, and we even re-baseline teams when their compositions change significantly. 30% of engineering time was being spent on KTLO. So this would have gone up by 50% if validated 20% as a healthy target. Thankfully, we had the most control over the largest contributing factor: production issue investigation and resolution. We knew our current observability tools were at best Dr. Frankenstein's monster. I had 2 people just keeping it from falling over, and we still had major reliability issues. Our SaaS partners didn't act in good faith, and one was a bad technical fit, which caused more issues. Now we had data to justify an investment. We established 3 top-level goals. Allow our team to focus on enablement rather than maintenance and support, with canonical user journeys in a minimum number of tools so teams could self-service. Give teams control over their data while being able to accurately budget, and allow teams to use modern paradigms for observability, not just logs and metrics, with a platform that scaled as we moved from a data center to the cloud. To avoid loss aversion, I went back to my bag of trick. We interviewed teams about their production investigation workflows. We identified 17 key capabilities, each with a set of workflows. For example, database monitoring had understand underlying DB health, show DB performance grouped by web endpoint, show the queries for a span, and show the overall worst performing queries. And then we prototyped. We selected 3 potential options based on our top line goals, and that was half our score. To get the other half, we built out partial deployments and shadowed 6 teams using them in action, asking them for a score from 1 to 5 for each of their workflows. I'm here, so you know what we chose. Datadog scored significantly better than the alternatives. We left logs out of scope. Teams were comfortable with their tools, and it was the smallest of our fires. We just needed to culture shift our teams from custom metrics to Datadog native workflows, completely changing how they thought about production, Right now, they have pinholes in the dark. Wouldn't they rather have a spotlight? No big deal. Oh, and we needed to convince our leadership to write a check for what would be one of our largest SaaS expenses, which I've obfuscated to this diamond-backed currency. We locked ourselves in a conference room for 2 days, building models, checking assumptions, but the data backed up our guts. Datadog should also have the lowest total cost of ownership. That data and a very impassioned speech got us to yes. It was ambitious. Move everyone to Datadog in 6 months using newer, more efficient observability paradigms while also making them net promoters both of Datadog and the migration process. We grouped teams into cohorts, with each having similar dependencies, of which only a few were net new from the previous cohort, and an engineer in the background getting those ready just in time. Each cohort had a dedicated facilitator, walking them through a 5-step migration process to build a seamless Datadog native workflow for all their use cases. We also had a facilitator working with all the cohorts to tie threads together. That person was really tired at the end of all this. And we tried to make each step 1 week to avoid double booking our facilitators, and it sort of worked, modulo some bunching when the net new gap got too large, but we still finished within 3 weeks of our initial target. Our team needed to track a lot of state, so I interviewed my bag of trick, and it told me to use a spreadsheet. We kept renaming it as use cases expanded, so it ended up being known as Prince. 10 tabs with a README and italicization for derived data. We'll walk through it for our search team. Teams tracked that they were in cohort 9 and their points of contact. Cohorts said cohort 9 kicked off in late February to be done early April, facilitated by Rob. Components listed all the technologies in our search stack and that they depended on monitoring the database and caching layers today, but not the streaming layer. Requirements then showed that cohort 9 would be the first to need to monitor the caching layer, but database monitoring would be ready for cohort 5. Use cases listed equivalent user journeys. Previously, they'd go to a custom dashboard to understand endpoint error rates, but instead they could just go to the APM page for that service. Dashboards and alerts listed all such dashboards that they looked at and all criteria that would trigger alarms. Most dashboards had out-of-the-box equivalents. We opened Jira tickets for each individual item to migrate and synced those to power a roll-up status sheet, highlighting where each team was in the migration. We fed that status to directors when teams needed extra encouragement. Some teams needed the hand-holding, and small incremental status helped them feel progress. Others took the instructions and ran with them, and they found value immediately. Sometimes we needed to manage expectations when they ran all the way off the end of the rails we'd already laid. Showing that every team was going to a standardized world also helped us eliminate some creative existing practices. We told our CTO and CFO, cross my heart, Datadog really will have the lowest total cost of ownership. We can manage costs, our budget will be predictable. Breaking that promise would be a bold experiment in job security, so I was highly motivated. My goal was to keep each product line under our modeled spend, because of course we'd underestimated something. We started simple, threshold monitors for every billable metric, just to keep an eye on what could spike. And then I got paged, every day. Our traffic is very cyclical, daily, weekly, seasonally. We evolved our monitors to use longer look-backs, change alerts, anomaly detection. We'd included a technical account manager in our Datadog contract because we wanted someone experienced in building out governance, and she was invaluable helping me understand the nuances of these metrics. Also, Datadog's governance tooling keeps getting better. A lot of these are easier today. Some people thought I was spending too much time chasing down spend spikes, but when you find a spike early and tie it to a specific change, you're not just saving money, you're teaching the team how to not do that again. Personally, I find it's easier to have one awkward Slack conversation now than a much more awkward Slack conversation with my boss asking me how much money we spent. I never worry when watching Star Trek. No matter how bad it gets, everyone will make it back alive. We did too. How else could I be here with you? We just signed our next renewal with Datadog after ending the first 18 months within 1% of our modeled budget. That's after finishing our logs migration, which we did an early renewal for after our initial success. We spend less on Datadog than our previous licensing and infrastructure costs, and I no longer need 2 engineers just to hold the system together. We also saved several engineers' worth of time across engineering, more than enough to pay for our entire contract. Oh, I said everyone earlier, didn't I? Maybe everyone minus a red shirt? One team continues to use their long-standing tools for their highly isolated environment because while we all agree Datadog is better, it's not exactly the same, which is what they need on their journey right now. Now, Pavlov's Datadog has helped us move up Maslow's hierarchy of observability, and we're finding new higher-order reliability issues. Feature teams are still struggling with the required maintenance that services require. It's a big change from a managed monolith. We recently introduced custom operational health dashboards with a section per question showing the backing data, getting us closer to walk than crawl. Don't try and read this. It's just a picture's worth 1,000 words. We use workflows to create scorecards, highlighting major outstanding maintenance and vegetables eaten per day. This doesn't solve the problem of making artichokes any easier to eat, though. And this is an area where more one-on-one time with teams can help us really get moving. There's been some hesitancy around declaring incidents for seemingly localized issues because teams don't want to create unnecessary work on others. Our recent firefighting-themed messaging of better to have a ladder truck you don't need has had the most resonance yet. Our majority root cause for incidents is a gap in testing coverage of all flavors, and we've had spirited discussions around the developer time cost of increased testing versus potential reduction in incident impact. We're starting to get signal where foundational issues are making testing more difficult and need to collect more data here. Even though we brought in product managers for the initial SLO discussions, they haven't been part of our incident process and haven't internalized that SLOs are a threshold for interrupting flow. We're now putting them on call to help quantify the impact of incidents, which determines the priority, and to own outward-facing communication as a way to align them on the human cost of incidents. So what have we learned? Our biggest time wastes were when we built for an expected future, only to have the world shift around us before we could roll out. We built an SRE program assuming both we and engineering would grow. We pivoted when we instead started shrinking, but could have read the tea leaves earlier and realized that we were building for a scale we just weren't going to be at. Better, we could have partnered with early adopters before defining program structures. Maybe we'd have to retrofit later, but by building it together, we could have had earlier impact. This similarly could have helped us build an internal platform with a lower operational lift. We rolled out one shared on-call pod for our most user-visible systems, but most teams still don't have formal on-call SLAs beyond eventual reachability. It's not perfect. I've been unable to reach people when I needed to during an incident, but it's come at a much lower cost for Redfin than rolling out something more formal. Operational health reviews are valuable even with imperfect data. Our narratives from the interpretation and sentiment of qualitative questions have been directionally correct, and we could have saved some direct facilitation by leveraging directors to focus their teams on key questions. We got most teams to a good enough alerting state by building a workshop, with less time than individual engagements of just our most alert-fatigued teams would have taken. Now, I just had an offer accepted for someone external to join my team for the first time in like 3 years, and I'm so happy. I told every candidate we are a customer service organization. Our customers are always right where they are, and we have to meet them there. Teams should come to us because they want help, not dread us coming to them because they expect work. They should always get more than they give while still doing most of the implementation. We may talk about standards, but teams have different levels of maturity. We must be gracious when teams are struggling to hit a bar and report not just on achievement, but trend lines. You have to build systems for the people and context you have. Like I built this presentation just for you. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. I hope you've learned something. Maybe someday I'll learn how to make visually consistent slides. What would you like to hear more about?
We have time for some questions. So if you have questions, please make your way to the microphone in the center aisle.
That dreaded spreadsheet of comparison against other vendors, we're in between that. How long did that process take you, including what were the steps of proof of concepts across the various vendors for you to sell it to the organization?
Yeah. In some ways, the process took us almost 2 years. When I started leading the observability team, when it became part of SRE, I could see the problems that our existing tool set was causing the organization and our teams, but we had long-term contracts that we were committed to. And so we started doing a lot of early just diligence and getting us set up for the idea that we were going to move off. When the work really started, it probably took us about 6 months. So we did the first analysis of the potential options and what we wanted our goals to be in about Q2 of 23. And then in Q3 is when we really got started on figuring out what a deployment would look like and building out the POCs. And the POCs, we didn't just install the agents and go. We actually looked at our most critical components, the things that most teams relied on, and made sure that all of the integrations were working as expected, that the data would flow. And that was a team of, I probably had 2 or 3 engineers working on that project for an entire quarter, just to do all of the validation. And then by Q4, we were in the Datadog is the right choice, but we need to make sure contractually that we're going to be able to execute. And then I think we got our contract executed as the end of November of 23. So it was about a 6-month process, 1 quarter of sort of slow build, and then another quarter of much more diligent build out, and then 2 quarters after that of getting everyone moved over.
Sorry, one follow-up question. Did you do the POC concurrently with the various vendors or one at a time?
We did one at a time just because the amount of work required to get some ready was significantly more than the work required to get others ready. And so, I mean, with Datadog, it was sort of, well, this mostly works out of the box, and so we can just start running our experiments.
Hi, I just want to say this session was super helpful to me personally. I am currently you and Libby. I'm starting an SR program at my company, very similar environment. Thank you for all of this because it's helped me, hopefully, to not go through similar struggles in what I'm doing. But I'm really curious about one piece on the KTLO component of what you started tracking there. So we're calling that toil, operational toil. And we've been measuring that as well. And our company has kind of a tug of war between product and development on how much time is acceptable to be spending on KTLO or toil work or a combination therein. And I'm really curious, you mentioned how you kind of measured and set this 20% kind of number. And then I'm just curious how you got to a point where that became this is our goal of how much time we're going to spend on this. And if you exceed that, what happens? Do you have any kind of procedures in place to help encourage teams to actually own that part of their work?
So the fun part about it is once we measured all of the data, we broke it down by director, and we could actually talk about the product velocity of various orgs and show how actually this org doesn't have to struggle with this at all. They've been really good about something new crops up, they're going after the root cause of it. It's a little bit more investment up front. And that snowballed. And the snowball wasn't immediate. I think that process took about a year. It was only in, maybe not our last route, but the one before, where I was like, oh my gosh, we have universally hit 20% across at least our product directors. There's still some open question about what is the correct amount of KTLO on the foundation side, and some of that is the nuance of how do you define what is KTLO if your job is working with other orgs and enabling them. And so if you look at our Kubernetes team, they still spend, oh gosh, I think it's 70% of their time on KTLO as defined. And we all agree that's unhealthy, but we also don't all of us know they don't need to get to 20. It's just like what is healthy for them.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
We do need to end here to keep everything on time. Am I?
Thank you for the
am I
presentation.
wrong? Arthur's looking at me
Don't
like
we
I'm
have till
wrong.
4:20?
Yeah, that's what I thought,
Oh.
420.
Am I wrong? Man, that's twice this year. All right, go ahead.
Great session, thanks for that. So one of the questions I have is like, how did you said spirited conversations, right? And the monolithic breaking into independent deploys, are you completely independent deploys? And what were the challenges when you're actually working with these product teams to break that monolith? How was release impacted? Biggest challenges while you're going through that process?
So I think we still have, so on the back end side, we still have one monolithic deploy. For the front end applications, I think we have two small things that are left to split out. Actually, my team owns one of them, and we're trying to deprecate it instead by we're replacing the ability to send metrics from the client front end, just asking teams to use Datadog RUM entirely. So the biggest challenges that we faced as we took our monolithic front end and split it up were performance regressions. We are very, very sensitive to web performance in Google Web Vitals because it directly affects ranking, and your search ranking directly affects like how much traffic you get, and the real estate industry is highly competitive even for page views. And so most of the challenges were, great, we built an isolated front-end framework, but how do we solve this performance bottleneck, and then this performance bottleneck, and this performance bottleneck? And being able to have the conversation with the directors and VPs of what level of performance regression is acceptable, if any, because sometimes you're just not going to be able to get parity until you roll out and can collect more data at scale. So that process, I think, took about a year to split out our biggest component from the monolithic front end, and it was mostly around performance.
Quickly to add, are there any like dependencies between these different teams, as in like one product team is dependent on another?
We still, despite having more of a distributed architecture, I would say there's still a big ball of spaghetti amongst dependencies, and we have been teasing those out, but the biggest challenges that are, despite isolating services, our data model is still really highly coupled, and we haven't, with the real estate market being the way it is, we haven't been able to justify an investment in decoupling the data model as well.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, great presentation. I was very impressed by the vendor selection diagram that you did, but I've had kind of difficulty telling that story to the higher ups with specifically the time savings on KTLO into dollars. How do you kind of prove that with data when you're using a tool if you have like novel issues coming up, or you don't have something to compare it to? Like, oh, Josh fixed this, in a day, but it probably could have taken a week.
Yeah. So a few things. We have a well-established conversion rate from engineer time into dollars. Okay. So whenever we are talking about engineering time, we can convert that to dollars. We had the number that 13.5% of engineering time was being spent on KT, or was being spent specifically in the production investigation workflows. So we could turn that into like an actual number of engineer hours per year. Mm-hmm. And then when we were doing our evaluation and actually shadowing the workflows, we timed how long it was taking teams to like understand the slowest endpoints in the application, and could see like, oh, you're actually like 75% faster at this thing that you do approximately 4 times a week, and did a lot of extrapolation on that. It was a I said we locked ourselves in a conference room for 2 days to like validate the model. It was a really big model in terms of how we did the interpolation, but we were careful to choose cross sections of teams in terms of technologies used and the kinds of applications that they built. So we have a lot of, very high traffic consumer-facing applications. We have a lot of very low traffic agent-facing applications, and they have different development models. And so we had to, say, okay, we've got this many teams of this shape and this many teams of this shape, and actually built it out extensively.
And just a quick clarification. So I guess in your situation, you have multiple teams using different tools, and you can, even though you're not comparing each team as like kind of a ranking thing, you're able to be like, oh, this is a very similar situation in this team with this tool. Is that what you're saying?
So the tool chain, Redfin for the most part has a very uniform tool chain. So it was all teams, or all but our red shirt team was using the same tool chain before. It was just like this team, our agent tools teams don't necessarily care about endpoint performance because it's that if that endpoint gets called 40 times a week, you could wait minutes for your response and go make yourself a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We still have time for questions. Anyone else got a question? All right. Well, there we go.
Yeah, I could do one. Fantastic presentation. I do have a question. So you mentioned that you guys were reducing your workforce throughout your journey through SRE.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys ever end up in a position where there was a product, feature, or service that didn't necessarily belong to anybody that was currently working there, and it became, well, how do I assign an expert or somebody to speak to this product and how it's doing and trending?
So if you ask our CTO, nothing is unowned. You just have to find the right owner. And so we do have a couple of, not quite catch-all teams, but we have what is essentially the platform team for all of our agent tools. And if there's something in agent tools that's unowned, suddenly the platform team owns it. If it needs required maintenance, and we have this quarterly process called consolidated asks, where we say, like, we as the platform organization need you to move to Datadog, and we estimate how much time it's going to take each team to take, or to do that task, and there's usually a dozen or so of these things. And we just have to, for teams like that, estimate, most teams this will take like 2 days. It's going to take 10. I'm really sorry, all these things land on you, team. And so we have created these sort of, there's a couple of catch-all bucket teams. And it means that we also have a concept of feature investment level, everything from actively developed to just keep it alive, literally just keep it alive.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. As somebody who is on one of those platform teams right now that is the catch-all, I was hoping for a different answer, but great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.